And then he says, okay, Captain, dead slow ahead. That's when I realized we had not tried out engines.
Okay.
And not tried out engines, the indicator cocks were open.
Okay. Oh.
And I have this practice of telling the chief engineer to keep a walkie-talkie in the engine room so that he's listening to our communication.
Our communication.
And I'm telling the officer from the bridge wing, okay, dead slow ahead. And from the engine room, chief engineer saying, Captain, we have not tried our engines, the engine indicator cocks are open. And this is like the ship is slowly moving as strong currents.
Right.
And
you still have your breast lines on.
Breast lines are getting tight.
Right.
So I'm trying to use the breast line to hold the ship. Not happening. Getting tight. Okay, slack a little bit. We've got this huge bulk carrier just behind us.
Oh,
and I'm telling this pilot. Pilot is like jumping. He's like, oh my god. He was like, oh. I'm telling him, pilot, you tell the tug to pull. You tell the aft tug to pull.
Welcome, Captain Ronodeep, to the first podcast of NavGuide Solutions. Welcome.
Thank you, Devashish. Thank you to you and the backstage boys, to Karan and Abhijit. You're doing a fabulous job. We don't get to be a part of such podcasts while at sea, or very few seafarers would be a part of this. So Thank you again.
I mean, I'm just very overwhelmed with the kind of experience you have, and I really wanted to bring you in to discuss relevant topics on your area of expertise, like bulk carriers, operations on bulk carriers, the commercial aspects, loading, discharging, things that you would feel that a seafarer would relate to. So thanks a lot for joining us, and we have collaborated earlier and we have worked together earlier, so that's a great connection we have there. So I'm very well aware of the kind of expertise you have. So how do you, I mean, so can we start talking about a little bit about the commercial aspects of bulk carrier operations?
Since I've been associated with bulk carriers for the last, let's say, roughly about 20 years. Of the 30 years at sea, things have changed. Things have changed in a very, I wouldn't say in a very drastic way, but in a gradual way, and which is enabling both the operator as well as the owner to gain a little bit out of everything.
Right.
For instance, the new age owners are not looking at saving fuel. So
wow, that's a big change.
Yes, earlier it used to be any drop of oil saved is $1 million saved. But having said that, of course, they do not give the ships the leeway to burn fuel as and when they like. It's not that way.
Right.
But they've set it up in such a way that they have a fixed day or a date or a time to be specific when the ship needs to arrive at the load port.
So you're saying that they don't care about the fuel if they have to meet the charter party requirements of arriving at a certain time, and which was not so urgent earlier.
Correct. It's the charter party requirement has, like you would also know, the charter party actually defines the fuel consumption.
Right.
The speed and the consumption is already given in the charter party.
Of course.
So I would rephrase your question in a way. They're not looking at the charter party requirement. They're working around the charter party requirement to get the best freight. So in order to get the best freight, they need to get the ship arrive at a particular port.
At a particular time. Yeah, right.
So that is what they want the ship to do.
Right.
So that is something which has changed over the years I've been with the bulk carriers.
So what you're saying essentially is that you are given a target date and time to arrive, and doesn't matter what you do, you have to arrive at that time. So it's a pressure on the master as well, right? I mean,
Correct. Pressure in the sense you need to have your cargo holds ready by that time. Of course, you do really get time to get the cargo holds ready. They wouldn't really. They really have an idea of how long the ship would take from port A to port B. So they will give you the time to get the cargo hold ready. More than that, and with this demand of getting to a particular point at a particular time, you have to be sure that your engines are performing
absolutely to the best of standards.
Correct. So,
Right, yeah.
in a way, I would say the stress is more on the chief engineer these days.
Right, of course.
Because I just need to tell him, Chief, we need to get to this point at so and so time. So
Right.
we can't have any stoppages.
But what about older bulk carriers which have, bulk carriers that are more than 15 or 20 years old? Are they also coping up to these kind of demands?
Actually, I mean, Debashish is already working on it. I'm sure you probably would know more than me. Right Ships has laid out norms. No matter how old your bulk carrier is, or how old your ship is, or how new, there are norms which every ship has to comply with.
Right.
So, Right Ships is actually tightening the screws here when it comes to optimum operation.
Right.
So the charterers and as you know, the Right Ships are rating the ships with the star rating.
Okay.
So the charterers these days would probably just go for the highest star rating that the ship has got. So
Sure.
they just look at the star rating and they know that okay, the ship is supposed
We'll
to
do that.
Yes. So I think we don't have a choice there, whether it's a new ship or old ship. I think the story is pretty much the same.
Right. What just out of interest? I mean, I have personally never worked on, been on a bulk carrier as such. But we have people working on us with bulk carriers. But I mean, what I wanted to ask is, what size of bulk carriers have you been on for your as a master, especially as a master?
I started off with handy size as a junior officer. As chief officer, I've been mainly on Panamax.
Okay.
That's about 70,000 deadweight. And as master now, I've been on a 210,000 deadweight Cape size, or it's called Newcastle size.
Right.
Newcastle Max. That's how they name it.
That's
They've got these
okay.
fancy names.
Right.
So so that's how it has been. Basically, it's just the quantity of power that differs. The operation is pretty much the same. Ship handling, yes. But then I was quite surprised, and I'm sure you've been on the tankers. The ships are built in such a way that they would handle better. The bigger the ships are handling better.
Really?
Wow. That's how.
Wow. So, from the commercial point of view, is there any difference between these different sizes of ships, or
commercial point of view? Yes, of course, the quantity of cargo.
But then the way a charter party is framed, or the targets that they get, or any other commercial implications on the size?
Yes, the size will determine which ports, the safe ports. Like if you remember the charter parties,
of course,
they mentioned the safe ports, safe berths, safe anchorages. So the size comes into size matters there.
Matters, yes.
Otherwise, yes, certain smaller ships have this option of carrying different kinds of cargo, clean cargo, dirty cargo.
Yeah.
So you could be carrying clean and then dirty, or dirty and then clean. So the charter party very clearly defines how the cargo has to be maintained and brought it up to that
standards. Yeah.
But for these big ships, the 200,000 plus, they're mainly ore carriers.
Right.
So they really do not have. There is nothing. There's nothing called hold washing or getting cargoes ready. I mean, there's no washing done.
Right.
There's no sweeping done. It's the same cargo that's there. So yeah, these are the few differences. Otherwise, it's more or less the same.
That's very interesting, actually, what you said just now, because this is exactly what I have also felt in all my career on tankers. Is that the bigger the ship gets, contrary to the popular belief, I believe the operations become simpler. I mean, a large
Yes.
crude oil tanker is practically carrying different grades of crude oil, and there's most of the time it's only single valve segregation we're talking about. We're not talking about very hard segregation, or rarely there are situations, but that's very interesting. I mean, we sometimes think that the bigger the ship gets, it will be more complicated to manage. If there are other elements, but from the cargo or from the operational point of view, sometimes I feel smaller ships have far more complex operations,
Yes.
like
And they
different
are,
grades and stuff like
the
that.
smaller bulk carriers are the workhorses, I would say. I mean, they have shorter voyages,
Voyages.
many ports, and they can actually call any port
Right.
in the world. So that becomes demanding, and that's challenging for the crew. Whereas the big ones have long voyages and not many ports they can call. So like you said, so the bigger you become, the lazier you get. So it's kind of thing, you know?
That's a very nice way to. That's a very nice analogy to put it across. You were talking about hold preparations and the cargo preparations. So, what do you think are the real challenges that the seafarer? I mean, I know people know. I mean, they have a certificate of competency, they have experience, so they probably would know the regular procedures of hold preparations. But do you find there are any areas where people are facing challenges there, or any areas that no?
Yes, I would say the challenges that we normally face when it comes to hold preparation. Now, when we talk about hold preparation, something that comes to comes to our mind is cleaning the hold or cleaning the tank top. But we sometimes overlook the fact that maintaining the hatch cover, weather tightness, is also a part of hold preparation. Because when I'm tendering NOR saying that my ship is ready to load this cargo and take it from point A to point B, fine, my bulkheads are clean, my tank top is clean, my bilges are clean. What about my hatch cover? Is it weather tight? Is it maintained in such a way that there wouldn't be any damage to cargo? So that has become a challenge. Hold preparation. There is a certain degree of cleanliness that is required for a certain type of cargo, which is not the case for the bigger ships, more for the smaller ones where they carry clean cargo like grain. Yes, there are certain methods of doing it. There are resources provided to the ship staff, chemical wash, freshwater washing, rinsing, plain and simple cleaning the bulkhead with a brush and a mop. So that is I would say, well documented, well organized, and the know-how is at a certain level now that people can do it without much of a hassle. Much of a hassle. But when it comes to the hatch cover maintenance, when it comes to confirming that your hatch cover is weather tight, there are certain things that is beyond the scope of the ship staff.
Okay.
This is where the owners and the managers have a bigger role to play, where if a defect has been raised by the ship staff, if a defect has been there on board the ship for a period of time, it needs to be looked into, because it needs to be planned up during a dry dock. Budget should not be an issue there. End of the day,
otherwise there's nothing that a ship staff can do if the hold is not having some physical deformities which are not correct.
Having said that, at the same time, the ship staff should also be aware of what checks needs to be done on a particular hatch cover and the fittings, so that the defect is brought out in the open. Because many a times you are not aware of what it should be,
how it should be checked,
and it looks all good, but there is a defect.
Right.
So then the owners and the managers cannot be blamed for. We are actually put on board to do that check.
Obviously, to identify those defects in the first place. Right. So, with your experience, I mean, how do you go about actually checking hatch cover, or what do you normally do when you are?
I really don't want to generalize it, but for me, and this is what I normally talk to my, it's the mate that I normally talk to about this, and the chief engineer, of course, he's a part of hatch cover maintenance. More than operations, maintenance is actually under the chief engineer.
Right.
One thing that I feel is very simple, but we tend to overlook it, and most seafarers, the new generation seafarers, the Generation Z,
Generation Z, yes.
They do not believe in reading manuals. I think any maker has a manual, and that's his what do you say?
That's a Bible of
and that's his trump card. I mean, today, if something is not given in the manual and a defect is observed which is not properly defined in the manual, the maker is liable for it. So he makes sure that A to Z, everything that is required to know about the hatch cover is there in the manual.
Right.
So for me, I would first go read the manual.
Okay.
End of it all. I mean, that's the simplest thing that we can do. Then take the manual and be there physically and see, compare what is there in the manual, what is not there, what is being displayed. I think that's number one. And if one is able to do that and clear doubts, today, with the day and age of internet on board, at the drop of a button, at the click of a button, click of a mouse,
we can find out all the information,
and we can get in touch with the makers. We can get in touch with the, if not the makers, we can get in touch with the managers who can direct us to the makers.
Yeah.
So, of course, first and foremost is knowing your ship, knowing the manual. Because, for instance, I worked on PTS. There's a maker, particular maker. I worked on McGregor. They look the same. The hatch cover looks the same.
Right.
But the operation is different. There are certain things which McGregor is given, this one's not given, this one's given, that one's not given. So, by looking at it this way, that, I've been on this particular ship and this kind of ship, and I've worked on this particular hatch cover, I think I know it all.
A little complacent and they feel they know everything. So, your suggestion that the first thing that a person should do about the hatch cover maintenance is to read the manual to find out what the maker is suggesting.
Yes, understanding the terminology.
Understanding the terms. Okay.
And the other thing, to put it in a very subtle way, to walk up to the forfeit store, open that box, the hatch cover spare box, which has a very nice key hanging to it, which has never been opened. It's all shining. To open that box and see what is there, tally the list that is there, and I think to start off, I think that is something we need to.
Right, you're carrying millions of worth of cargo inside, so it's the least we can do is to make sure that the hatch cover is well protected, and I mean it's equipped to protect the cargo in a proper manner. So, so when you, I mean, after somebody reads the manual and when you go on deck to actually physically check the cover, are there some specific areas that you have seen that they are like they usually give you trouble, or like areas where you would expect to find cracks or something like that? I'm not sure.
More than cracks, this is like we started off with the commercial aspect.
Yeah.
Now, cargo is one of the most important aspect of any commercial trade.
Of course.
So, as a seafarer or as a service provider, I'm actually carrying goods from point A to point B. My job is to make sure that the goods are intact and the way they have been loaded, they're discharged the same way.
Right.
So over here on a bulk carrier, for that matter, any particular ship, nil damage to cargo. That is the prime focus. The only thing it is not rocket science it wouldn't be rocket science to try and understand that the only way we can stop damage to cargo on a bulk carrier is to avoid water from
ingress.
ingress.
Of
So
course.
that is the main area, focus area for a hatch cover is sealing. Sealing of the hatch cover.
Right.
Now, hatch covers have these. We have this particular special rubber packings, which are all around the hatch cover top.
Right.
And there are these compression bars, which are not very typical to hatch bulk carriers. I think even on tankers you would have compression bars on the booby hatches.
Booby hatches. Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
So it's the same kind
concept.
of it's the same concept. So the first focus area is hatch cover packing, condition of the compression bar, and the hatch cover lips, where your the hatch packing lips.
Yes.
That's where your packing sits.
Yeah. Right.
Most of the time, these areas are overlooked, more than overlooked. They are sometimes not worked on because they're difficult to access. It is, first of all, you need to have the hatch cover open while working on them.
Yeah.
Second of all, you can't have them open while you're at sea.
Right.
So you need to have good time and anchorage to work on them. Third of all, they're at a height.
Right.
And you need to have
good weather,
scaffolding, good weather. Working aloft is another issue now, or dangers to working aloft. That is something that we need to keep in mind. And fourth is the time, because
you're into busy schedules and
not more than that. To actually get the hatch cover packing lip worked on properly, one needs to take out the packing first.
Okay.
Because we need to take out the packing first, then work on the lip, and then put the packing back. And that
is a huge job for a big ship, especially for a bigger.
Correct. And then if we have not done the job well, and we land up having water seepage or some kind of water ingress, then it is like, even though we worked everything out as per the manual, as per what is required, all safety standards maintained, but it's still at a loss. So these are certain.
In the very recent times, I have seen there's a lot of focus on hatch cover training on maintenance of hatch covers, and nowadays the companies want the seafarers to do the training which is from the makers.
Correct.
Every maker is doing their own training. So you must have gone through trainings like that. Yeah. I mean, are they? I mean, first of all, are they video-based trainings, or how do they do this?
It's hybrid. It's video-based. Not to that extent, but it's similar to what you are actually trying. They're trying to gather videos from ships to make up these training videos.
Sure, yeah.
So they've not been able to get that much of data as yet. At least the company that I'm working for, so they've not been able to get that much data as yet. But 70%, 80% of it is theoretical. But it's a requirement by right ships actually now, where the inspector wants to check if at least the master and the chief officer has had this training on hatch cover maintenance and safe operations of hatch covers. Because there have been cases where ships have called port and they've not been able to open the hatch cover in time to have the cargo loaded.
My God.
Now, the root cause analysis has shown that excessive rust at certain critical locations, which has not allowed the ship staff to operate. Yes, of course, the ship staff has also not checked. But coming back to what I earlier mentioned, they've not had the opportunity to get that work done, because of lack of resources. Certain heavy duty jobs cannot be done by the ship staff.
Of course.
Needs external assistance. So that is something that is Right Ships is looking at. And there's another aspect which they are looking at is knowledge of hydraulics. Now, we as the deck officers or navigating officers, even though we are just responsible for the operations. The maintenance bill, like I said, comes under the chief engineer. But
But you
we as
need
a
to
master,
know,
we need to know
course,
how hydraulics works.
Yeah.
The basic system of draining water, the basic system of circulating the oil,
Obviously, yes.
the basic system of filtering the oil, whether it is getting filtered
Right.
or not, knowing what the equipment is designed to do,
Yeah.
basic understanding of directional valves,
Right.
whether it's cross flow or a parallel flow or neutral, what exactly is happening when I'm operating the lever. I think it should be our responsibility to understand and know. And me, as even today, when I go and I have a word with the chief engineer, I said, Chief, please explain it to me.
Sure.
I'm not able to understand this.
Right.
Please explain how it works.
But are the makers' trainings taking care of that aspect as well?
Not really. Not really. Actually, if you see Michael's manual on hatch cover, they have a schematic diagram of the hydraulic system.
Okay.
The line diagram.
Yeah.
Where the valves are, this.
Right.
But they don't really give information as to what needs to be checked and what and how it is to be checked, which is actually, it comes as a part and parcel of the engineering bit. So the engineers,
they know it by their, they already know
Yeah.
it, but then the maker is not going out of their way to explain this
Correct.
separately for
Correct.
it, which you feel is a necessity for deck officers.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
That is something that should be there and it helps. It's like knowing something new.
Yeah.
Of course, we are not trained to operate it, but
I totally get that,
Yeah.
because I mean, if you compare the same analogy in case of oil tankers or in case of liquid carriers, you've got to know the operation of the pump. What is the impeller?
Right.
What is the, I mean, you cannot depend. I mean, if you are operating cargo, you need to know the physics behind it.
Yes.
The physics of it is very, very important if you want to operate it. So a similar analogy for that. I mean,
Right.
or for the mooring winch, for example,
Right.
as deck officers, we've got to know how it works.
Right.
The draining, the
Right.
water, where it's going to give us trouble. Yeah. I totally get that. So that's a gap you're saying that.
I think it should be, yes. But I guess, like we discussed this day and age with one click of the mouse, you've got.
Yeah. No, and another thing that you very interestingly said is that you can always go on a ship and ask the chief engineer to carry out a training like that for the deck officers.
Yeah, of course.
That's very
Absolutely.
that's a perfect solution to that problem because he would know.
And if somebody has the interest, and that is something that the core factor is self-interest.
Yeah, of course.
That is the end of it all.
End of it all.
Whatever it is, the self-interest. That's the fact that today you are here doing a podcast. I think it's commendable feat that you've achieved, I must say.
So coming to the operational aspects of loading and discharging of bulk carriers. Now, we have prepared the holds. We have made sure that the hatch covers are intact and in order. Now we have arrived in port for loading. I know most of the viewers probably would know that how the normal loading discharging goes, but I leave it to you if we can go into the process a little bit and then probably go into areas where you feel people are making mistakes essentially in the loading discharging.
To keep it simple, loading is like the word goes, putting something in. Unloading, or the right word to use, is discharging. Taking something out. So we have an equipment called lodicator. I'm sure.
Lodicator, so that is, of course. I mean, I'm saying that if we go into the loading aspects of bulk carriers, where do we start and how do we go about it?
I'm coming to that.
Yeah, sure.
So basically, coming back a little bit to on the commercial aspect, they give, not normally, they do give a voyage instruction, which you are aware of.
Yeah, but you were telling me earlier that they have stopped giving the charter party, and earlier they were actually giving the charter party to the masters.
Yes.
Now you don't get a charter party; you get a voyage orders.
Yes. It depends actually. I shouldn't say earlier or now. It depends on the owners actually.
We
Some
on
owners.
tankers, by the way, we have never seen very. I mean, I've been, as a master from 2013, and before that as chief mate. I've always seen we always used to get voyage orders, and almost
Yeah.
never. We used to sometimes get extracts of charter parties, like few clauses here and there, but never the entire charter party. I don't remember I've ever seen a full charter party as a master on the ship.
Yeah, I remember when joined the ship as a mate, and I think in the office before joining there was a debriefing going on, and in that checklist there was a box which said, "Have you read the charter party?" Or no, make sure you read the charter party.
Okay.
So going by that, I think the bulk carriers have this. Bulk carriers always have this. This as a normal thing to have a charter party on board. So I've always had it initially as master, and I would go and find out. Sometimes I would take over a ship, and the master would say, "Charter party." What? I said, "Okay, never mind." So I would just send a message over to the vessel manager saying that I would require the charter party. Can you organize that? So they would just get in touch with the operations and. So charter party, yes, it depends from owners to owners. I shouldn't say that it was there earlier, it's not there now. But yes, the last ship that I was on with this particular owner, there was no charter party on board. And like I did earlier, I sent a message over to the office saying that I would like to have the charter party. And the reply was that the owner doesn't want to share the charter party with the master. So now there could be two things, or two ways of looking at it. Some people will say, "Oh, good, very good. I don't have the charter party, so I'm not
Plausible deniability.
plausible deniability." But then shipping doesn't work that way.
Right. You have to take responsibility.
End of the day, you are who is responsible.
Right.
And the other way of looking at it is, no, I would want to have that. I would want to read that. I would want to know what is required and what is not.
Right.
So the only way out around is send any doubt that comes to your mind. I would just send a message over to the operator saying that since I do not have the charter party with me, am I okay to do with this? Go ahead with this.
You've got to clarify every point with them.
And in writing.
Right.
Because this day and age, most of it is done on WhatsApp. That's another problem area.
Right.
Even being old school, I would rather have something in writing.
In writing.
But that is even in the court of law, that is what counts.
That stands.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yes, charter party is usually there, but I did not have it on my last ship. And the charter party gives you details about the parameters the vessel needs to maintain with regards to fuel consumption, speed, weather routing, what weather what you need to perform in what particular weather. So all that details are given. But here we are given a voyage instructions which just says refer to charter party dated so and so, and everything is either taken as what the normal is,
Okay.
or if you have a doubt, then you check with the operator and find out about the speed that I need to maintain, what weather routing.
Right.
So coming back to your question on cargo, the voyage instructions will give us what cargo we are to load, and normally in the bulk trade, I don't know how it is. I'm sure it is done in the tankers also. 10%.
There's an allowance. Yes.
10%.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's either plus minus, or it's only minus, or
Correct.
it's only plus.
Yeah.
So
That is how they frame that sentence.
Frame the
This is the cargo.
within that
10%,
allowance.
yes, 10% plus minus. And they specify the grade. Now, as I said, the big ships, even though we are loading iron ore, but iron ore comes in different grades.
Okay.
Yeah, so iron ore pellets, iron ore fines, iron ore lumps.
Right.
So they come in different grades.
Uh-huh.
So they specify the grades, but they're more or less the same. It's basically the storage factor that we need to worry about. The storage factor is going to give us the quantity of cargo that we can load in. It's like the box.
Yeah,
it's like
a
box.
unit per unit volume.
But yes, you're loading in the box, so we know exactly how much we can load.
Yeah.
So that is something that differs. So and the grade. So this is the
So basically, storage factor, just to clarify, is it what's the unit? Like it's a ton per meter cube, or is it?
It's just that.
So it's weight per unit volume.
Correct.
Basically. Okay.
So this is the information that is given to us, and then we take this information and we use this computer called the Lodicator
Right.
to feed in the data. The data that we are feeding in is, of course, the storage factor.
Okay.
And what grades are we going to load in what cargo hold.
Okay.
Now, we have to keep something in mind, which is a very important thing, is we might be loading in one port, but we might not be discharging in one port. But we have two different ports. First of all, I'm sure it's the same with the
tanker trade as well. Yes, of course.
No
We've got to
commingling.
calculate all the possibilities in all the ports
Correct.
before we even start loading.
Correct.
Before we send the storage plan, for example.
Correct. And no commingling.
No commingling. Yeah,
Correct.
of course.
Yeah. So even here, bulk we can't be commingling.
Right.
So here we have to differentiate the cargo holds. Which cargo hold is going to have what particular grade, and the other is going to have this. So that's how we do. This is the first planning that we're going to do and put it down in the Lodicator.
Right.
So the load, and then of course we're going to put in our the variables, like you have your ballast, your fresh water, and whatever variables that you have, and we work out. We have a plan that this is what we can work out with.
Okay.
So that is basically what loading is.
Right.
And then we fine tune that cargo bit to get the total cargo.
Okay.
Yeah, so the main thing, the first and the foremost thing, like I said, we make a plan. It's called the load plan.
Right.
So it's always a plan.
Okay. Yeah.
So we don't need to stick to that plan, but it just gives a overall perspective of what is going to happen.
Yeah.
And how we can work out doing the best we can. But the most important thing that we need to keep in mind is the stress. Stress, I don't mean the mental stress, that is always there. So by stress, what I mean is the stress on the steel structure of the ship. So that I'm sure any ship has the same, you would know enough about it.
Right.
On a bulk carrier, like the way it is designed, it's like a bucket.
Yeah.
So basically, we are filling up a bucket with something.
Yes.
Now, even when we take a bucket that we normally use, the maximum load comes on the handle when we pick up the bucket.
Right.
So here, we do not have a handle as such, but we have those beams, longitudinal beams and the transverse beams, which is always the case of any particular ship.
Any ship, yeah.
So this is something that we'll have. This is something that we need to focus on. That what is the stress distribution along the length of the ship. Now, when we started off the conversation, we were talking about big ships, small ships. The bigger the ships, they get lazier, but the stresses
might go very high.
It exponentially increases. So that is something that we need to look into.
Right.
We have to understand what is happening. Like, for instance, like to make it very simple to a layman. If I use this pen, and this is the length of the ship, I'm loading cargo at this end, and the ship is tilting this way. I'm loading cargo at this end, and the ship is tilting this way. Now, with cargo loaded here and here, obviously, I don't think
stress is going to come.
I don't think it's going to be difficult for anybody to understand that this is going to bend, even though it is not visually seen. It's going to bend in a concave or a convex.
It's an inverted U shape, like a
inverted U
hogging.
shape. Yes,
we call it. Yeah.
So then we distribute the cargo in the center so that we bring it back evenly.
Yes.
But bulk carriers have this, especially the ore carriers, the heavy cargo carriers, they have an additional feature by which they tell us, the loading manual tells us that the particular ship has to be loaded in such a way that the individual bulkheads in between needs to comply with individual stresses.
Okay.
So if I'm loading the forward end and then loading the after end and somewhere towards the forward or somewhere towards the aft, we probably might not visually see it, but there would be a lot of stress between the bulkhead between
in the midship
in the midship area or adjacent holes, which is already loaded. So even though we normally check the overall stress, which is along the length of the ship, we also need to see the stresses on individual bulkheads.
Right.
So whether
transverse bulkheads you're talking about.
Transverse bulkheads, correct. Individual transverse bulkheads. So there are two ways of checking, two methods of checking. One is taking one cargo hold full and the other one empty. So what is stress? Transverse, the stress on the transverse bulkhead in between, and with both cargo holds with cargo air filled, what is the stress then?
Right.
So,
and eventually, if you are loading in multiple ports and multiple grades, there might be a situation where you have alternate holds empty and those kind of things.
So alternate hold load, that is what I was actually coming to. Bulk carriers have this, they have been given this leeway to load alternate holds.
Right.
Now, most charterers these days, during the time when I joined sea, we had master mariners who used to actually sit as operators. Now you might have a MBA in whatever, who is actually your operator. Who he or she has never been on a ship, and he or she doesn't understand what a master is talking about when I'm saying my intermediate bulkhead stress is not complying with. My overall stress is complying with, but my intermediate bulkhead stress is not complying with. So they would try and force us to do a certain kind of loading, and they plan a certain kind of discharge whereby I'm left with vacant holes in between, and my stresses are not complying. So this is a catch-22, I would say, a situation where while doing the loading plan, I'll have to work out different possibilities of discharge to see if my intermediate stresses are whole stresses are compliant.
And when you're sending this storage plan or the loading plan to the office, you need to mention that these are the compliant conditions in which I can distribute discharge the cargo or load the cargo. These are the possible combinations.
Yes, not in so many words, because like I said, the guy who's sitting on the other side has no knowledge of what I'm saying. For him, it is maximum cargo lift and maximum freight.
Right.
So when as master, I've already sent a message over saying that this is the distribution that I can have. He is taking it for granted that I have worked out every possibility, and I am okay with any kind of possibility.
No, but what we normally used to do in tankers is that whenever we get a multi-grade loading or a situation where we know that there will be different discharge ports, more than one discharge port and different load ports, there was a disclaimer that this storage is compliant to these kind of different discharge conditions. Like if for a tanker, for example, what the analogy would be that most tankers use this tank called slop tank for recirculating the cargo and educting their other tanks, which is a very, very efficient. It's purely mechanical system. There are no moving parts involved. It's just physics that is used very cleverly. Eductor is a very beautifully designed piece of engineering. So basically, we have to load a certain grade of cargo in the slop tank, and that should be the first grade to go out, because then we have to load the second grade in the slop tank and then use that cargo to educt the second grade. Now, if somebody wants us to discharge the second grade first, we have already loaded the first grade in the slop tank. We can't do it. So when we send out the storage plan, we usually put a disclaimer that this grade will go out first, that will go out second. But probably you will. I mean, I don't know if that flexibility is there in the bulk carrier industry also.
A bulk carrier, when we are, it's usually 2 grades that we load. I've not really seen 3 grades, but it's usually 2 grades. So either the first grade in the first discharge port and the second grade in the second discharge port.
Yeah.
So there's not too much of complication there. Only thing is, in the second discharge port, if there's a major restriction in the draft,
Right.
and the vessel is not allowed to have anything more than a certain draft, automatically your cargo quantity reduces. And we'll have to keep in mind that alternate hold loading or any bulk carrier loaded with certain cargo holds empty, the allowance given is always calculated for the maximum sailing draft.
Right.
So that means when I'm reducing my draft, that allowance is also reducing.
Right.
So if a charterer is telling me that I need 80,000 tons of cargo in the second discharge port, and for 80,000 tons of cargo, I need to have so and so holds empty, because the ship is designed for 200,000 tons of cargo, but I'm discharging 120,000 tons in the first discharge port, and I'm left with 80,000 tons. And I have to maintain a certain draft.
Yeah.
So my allowance given by the design, by the architect, is also reduced, because he says that if you are loading alternate holds, you need to maintain a certain draft to have that strength in the bulkheads.
Right.
So that becomes a challenge, because that is where the charters don't understand, and they force us to sometimes, or they twist us to sometimes do that bit of loading or do that bit of voyage.
Right.
That is where my role comes in play, as a master, and that overriding authority. Yes, that, and I need to first know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I cannot be just saying something without knowing what that, because even though they are not well versed with shipping, but they have the support system who can actually tell them what exactly is the situation. So that becomes a little bit of a challenge and a grey area. But these days, I mean, things have changed. In fact, after a lot of there have been cases of a lot of bulk carriers breaking into two, and they've, even while loading in the loading port, the ship has broken into two pieces. While en route, they've had this issue. So charters are also taking it lightly, and they don't really push the master. Not too much on that.
Understood. Got it. That's fantastic. And I mean, this operation, when somebody is making a storage plan or a loading plan, as you said, are there areas that you found new chief officers, essentially inexperienced chief officers, making some particular kind of mistakes which are going to be, which might be very dangerous? Or
I wouldn't say dangerous, but I always believe that any field that you are in, I mean, I cannot say that I know it all.
Sure, of course.
But at least whatever you know it to the best.
Yes, of course.
That's something that I think you're also from that era when we were brought up that way.
Sure.
Our masters or our chief officers used to engrave that into us. That at least what you know, you should know good.
Sure.
These days, I feel the new generation chief officers are too reliant on the lodicator. Yes, the lodicator is essential, and too reliant on some Excel formula somebody has made somewhere.
True.
But he has not taken the pain to find out the calculation behind that Excel. I mean, Excel is just made by you and me.
Exactly.
What is that calculation behind it?
So true.
So especially when it comes to something very peculiar with bulk carriers is trimming cargo, trimming the ship.
Okay.
Trimming is when we get to the final bit of loading.
Yeah.
We have to, unlike tankers where you have liquid, you can actually flow liquid
Sure.
right, left, forward, aft.
It just take the shape of the container, so as they say.
But bulk, you can't do that because once you've got that thing in the cargo hold, you cannot remove that cargo.
Sure.
So we have this thing, very critical operation called trimming, whereby we do that little bit of a calculation as to how much we choose two particular holds, one forward and one aft.
Okay.
And we do a little bit of a calculation to find out how much cargo needs to be put in either to have a particular trim to sail out with.
Right.
So that requires a little bit of a calculation.
Right.
Now the method that is being used by most chief officers, I'm not saying it's wrong, but my point is, why don't you do a physical, manual calculation and then compare the two?
But tell me something, Captain Ranade. This is very interesting because I see this a lot happening in the tanker industry as well. Because if you, I would say, most of the chief officers and most of the people I've sailed with, they have sort of trusted that Excel sheet, which is in the tankers case, it's called the Alid sheet. So basically, a calculation which is so essential, and you need to know that calculation to the bottom of it. I mean, people depend on the formulas, and sometimes the formulas are off. And if the formula is off on a 200,000 ton ship, whether it's a tanker or a bulk carrier, it might end up in a couple of 100 tons of this difference in cargo, which is we're talking about a big amount of money, and that's money for the charterers which we are supposed to carry. So the thing is, is this the exact thing that you said, the understanding of this calculation, is it part of our syllabus or is it taught on board somewhere? Or is there any training that is given on this area, or how do the seafarers know this calculation if they want?
Unfortunately, Debashish, I'm sure you've also gone through it. The Indian syllabus, our DG syllabus does not cover this.
But even if we go outside of India, if we talk about any have you found that certain countries are paying more attention to these kind of calculations?
No, not really. I did my mates and masters from the UK, and I could be wrong in saying that this exact bit was taught to us. But it was actually taught to me by a chief officer.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yes, it was taught to me by a chief officer, and I saw him doing it, and I actually questioned him that when you have this program with you, why are you doing it manually? And that's exactly what he explained.
Right.
That someone like you and me has developed this program. It's got some calculations, formulas. So you just have to put in the digit and you get an answer. But what if the formula is wrong? What if the formula is taking a wrong data? Then everything goes haywire.
Right.
So that's how I found it very interesting. That's the thing, Debashish. I found it interesting. So I just, from that day, I used to do it manually, and I used to be overjoyed when I found both the answers very close to each other.
It's like matching up a balance sheet.
I tell you, it used to be so fun. So that is how I work, and that is what I keep telling my chief officers, that do it. You do it once and you love it. And I'm on Panamax ships, we used to load in New Orleans, for the Panama Canal.
Right.
And Panama Canal, as you remember, they've got a draft restriction of 12.4 something 12.04 if I can remember right. 12.04 at 0.9998 density, not one.
Right.
It's
it's
fresher than fresh water.
Yeah. So that's a beautiful passage, by the way. Panama Canal is one of the most beautiful things I've seen.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you're in the locks, and you have
amazing.
You have these beautiful women standing, and you're on the bridge wing.
Yeah, it's a vacation. It's a tourist spot. People come there to pay money to see ships and
So going back to that, I remember, we used to do this back calculation that we were told that, okay, fine, you have to be loading in New Orleans for the Panama Canal and then to Japan. So we used to place the ship, not physically, but virtually place the ship in Panama Canal
Right.
and then back calculate to
Our way to
New Orleans.
New Orleans, yes.
So that itself, change of trim with density, that is something that we used to study
Right.
in our
Of course.
stability.
Stability
That is
classes.
something that we applied there, change of trim with density. So if you do something manually,
This is actually very close to my heart as well. This thing that you just explained, that people, instead of trusting the formulas and the Excel sheets and things like that, if they go down to the basics, there's a lot more things that can come from that. Not just loading, but or discharging, but also they can derive other applications of that knowledge.
Yeah.
So that's very few people take this pain to do that.
And
but even if they want, I believe, are there such mentors on board? I mean, do you feel that you have seen such mentors who are really actively interested to teach this calculation, like the chief officer who taught you?
There are, I wouldn't say
there
there are a few
Okay.
who are interested in this, but it has to be reciprocating. I mean, I
Sure.
could be someone ready to teach, but the other
The person is not interested to listen.
So
Sure.
then it all falls flat. So that is something that it's not like going back to what we were discussing. It's not taught anywhere. It is something that you have to try and understand and learn.
Right.
And most important thing is, how is the ship being loaded? Something that's how. If it's interesting to you, then it's. I think.
Right. So, what about the physical aspects of loading and discharging? Do you find any operational aspects when the ship is physically gone to, actually loading the cargo? During that time, if you have seen any best practices or something that you used to follow as a chief officer or as a master?
Not much to do with loading and discharging as such, but there was one incident where I learned myself as to the commercial implications of inappropriate cargo loading. So there was this case where this particular port, we were loading iron ore, and I was on the bridge, happened to be on the bridge at that time, and I saw the chute was just parked above number 7 cargo hold, and cargo coming in. Along with the cargo, there were gunny bags and plastic bottles and plastic sheets and you name it, all the junk that's normally.
So this is coming together, on the chute?
On the chute. So from the pile, which is on some location on ashore. So all this was actually piled up on the cargo, and that was. So that's when I had to report. I first stopped the cargo, and that's when I got a call from the agent asking me the reason for stopping the cargo, and I mentioned it. And he came back saying, this is a normal thing, you don't have to worry about it.
I see.
We'll give you a letter kind of thing, indemnity letter. I said, fine, do whatever you want to do, but I'll just clause the mate's receipt so that it's reflected on the
Bill of
BL.
lading, yeah.
So that's when everything broke loose, and they started off with their negotiations. So ultimately, it went on for quite some time. And I called up my owners, called up the charterers, and they said, no, nothing doing.
You must clause the BL.
Correct. And ultimately, we did clause the BL, the mate's receipt, and then the BL. So that was one incident where I got to know the implications of such dirty cargo, you would say.
Sure.
And we were loading for Japan.
Right.
So it's as a face saver, this is the least we could have done.
And what would you say would be the consequence if somebody does not clause the mate's receipt in this case, and they just accept that, okay, this is the norm of the port, this is how the cargo will come? What would happen to that seafarer, or what would happen eventually to the company's reputation?
If a ship is loading cargo which is dirty and there's no documentation against it, at the discharge port, the receiver would say that the shipper has not agreed to it, and shipper will certainly not agree.
Yeah.
Shipper has not agreed to it. So whatever has happened is during the voyage.
Right.
and we've not done our due diligence.
Due diligence.
So that's the basic.
That's a huge claim for them. I mean,
Oh, yes.
it's the same thing which happens in case of oil tankers as well. I mean, not in exactly in this form, but there are areas where if you are unable to prove that you have carried the right amount of cargo or the right quality of cargo which was loaded, it could end up in a
Yeah.
disaster for the reputation of the company and the
Right.
carrier, which is in this case the ship owner or the ship's. Yeah. So, right. So, any other aspect you want to touch on the loading discharging area, or any particular things that comes to mind?
There's one thing, human factor, which I try to. I always like relating shipping with a human touch,
Right.
and I keep telling my chief officers that enjoy loading. The entire process of loading cargo on board the ship, the entire process, coming alongside, opening your hatch covers, getting your cargo holds cleared by the authorities,
Right.
loading cargo, taking drafts, calculating your trimming cargo, finally loading and loading to your marks.
Right.
Enjoy it, because most chief officers I've seen, they get so tense, especially the ballast operation. Of course, bulk carriers, I did touch on it, but ballast operation is another very critical aspect of bulk loading.
Right.
You have to take out the ballast. There is no other way for it. So they get tensed. They either show it physically, or they're not able to show it, but then they're just building up. The pressure is just building up within themselves.
Right.
So I keep telling them, enjoy it. Everything can fall in place. You have to know your ship first. You have to know how the ballast pump is running.
Sure.
You have to know how to regulate ballast pumps so that you can take out. These are centrifugal pumps.
Right.
You have to know the relation between discharge pressure and suction pressure, amperage, lot of things. So you have to understand that. Once you've done that, of course you have the engineers to help you out, but once you've done that, you can handle it, and you have a good trim, handle it, and also learn to hand over responsibility to the junior officers. The chief officer handing over to the second officer or the third officer that I need to take some rest, I need to go and freshen up, I need to go and have my meals.
Right.
So you guys, so that is a part of loading, I mean, in entirety, in totality, it's actually, that is something
So
that,
true. I mean, they say that there's a very popular theory that you can, even if a job is apparently mundane or boring, you can make it interesting through, they call it the principle of 3 Ps. We learned this when we were creating the content that we were. So either you can involve, it's called people, profit, and play.
okay.
So either you get people together with you and you sort of create an environment where you get validation from that work, which is a trigger for you to make the job enjoyable, because if you know that if you make it enjoyable, people will validate you. So very often companies come back with notes of appreciation for some jobs well done, which is a big area of, it's a pat on the back goes a long way, especially for a seafarer, because end of the day he's only working for money, but
very important,
so companies realize that sometimes, not all companies do. Then there is the play part, where you make a game out of it. Like if you have achieved a certain goal in a certain time last time, this time you push it a little bit. You achieve the same goal in an earlier time, or you do it more perfectly, or some kind of a game which you're playing with yourself, and not for any other enjoyment, but just because you have managed to beat yourself. Like I used to play with when in the discharge, the first discharging when I was a chief officer, that charter party said that you've got to complete within 24 hours. The entire cargo has to go within 24 hours. And every chief officer was achieving about 23 hours, 20 minutes, 23 hours, 30 minutes. And so when I joined, it was like a challenge for me also. Okay, I've got to beat this. Look, okay, so I finished once in 23 hours or 22 hours, 30 minutes. So the play part of it, and obviously profit, we all understand. Like if you have a monetary or a financial gain or something to gain, it makes the job enjoyable. So
Yes.
so yeah, I mean, what you're saying probably is to make it enjoyable in your own way.
And
right?
most times, very often, I've seen people micromanaging. Shipping is one industry where you cannot run by micromanagement. It is, you have to trust the guy who is there in front of you, even if he is a newcomer. You'll be surprised that he can come up with certain ideas which you've never thought of, even though you've been at sea for so long. So cap on it and make use of the guy who is there in front of you. I mean, if you're micromanaging, then you're not giving him that opportunity to do something for you.
Right.
And it's a teamwork. Any loading, I would say, especially since we're talking about loading, it's a complete teamwork. I mean, it cannot be, if any chief officer is saying that I did the loading myself. I don't think I don't think that's true.
Unfair.
Yeah.
So many people involved.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Essentially, so you're handling some of the largest bulk carriers in the world. So I want to ask you about navigation as well. Do you find there is any difference between navigation on a bulk carrier and navigation on another type of ships, or is it just dependent on the type of the size of ships in general?
I don't think the basic concept of navigation changes. I don't think that changes, because no matter what size you're on, the action that you need to take would be the same. Yes, the maneuverability aspect is different from ship size. Smaller would be easier to maneuver, the momentum would be larger, so you have to keep that in mind, that you're giving hard over, what would be the advance, what would be the transfer. But having said that, it's like I've always connected navigating with driving. My gut feeling is, and I know it is true, that if someone is there who loves driving, he would love navigating.
Right.
So,
and by the way, you also love driving, right? You drive for I know.
Yes, I like to drive around, and navigating has always been. It's never been. I've enjoyed navigating always, and I look forward to having traffic around. I actually like when we are approaching China, where there's a lot of traffic.
Yellow Sea.
Yeah. And so that is one thing about navigation. You have to like it first, because I've come across people who panic just by being on the bridge. Just by being there and knowing that he has the con or he is responsible of the watch. So that is something that one has to overcome, because it's a psychological thing. So when I've come across people like that, I've told them to, after finishing their contract, get back home and do analysis of your get help from somebody and try and analyze this, because if you panic and if you're scared, especially if you are in command, the junior officer is going to look up to you, and you can't take a decision because you have panicked. Then I think
not a good situation.
You've lost the battle there.
Control.
And connected to that is the bridge team as such. So if you do not panic yourself, you automatically build that confidence in your bridge team.
In the bridge team.
I remember when I was a junior officer, I was a third officer, and I was on this run continuously transiting the English Channel, and we sailed out from a port called Zeebrugge in Belgium, and on the way to Southampton. So we had to cross the southwest lane, northeast lane, and get into the southwest lane. And there's this light buoy called Foxtrot 3 Raycon. It's a Raycon, and that used to be the roundabout. So he had to turn around and get into the
Southwest
southwest side.
on the other side, yes.
And we sailed out from Zeebrugge, and the master was there. He was on board and on the bridge, and he said, "Ranadeep, you have the con." So I was like, "Oh my god!" And the pilot had just got off. And then I asked him, "So you
This was before the boy or after the
before
boy?
the boy?
Before
We just got out of the port, and the pilot has just got off."
Okay.
And so I asked him, "Sir, you mean I have the con? I'm going to cross the lane and join the southwest lane?" "Yes, you have the con." And that's exactly what he said. And he just took the chair, the pilot's chair, and he sat over there. And I was actually almost, I was shivering basically. But I did it.
Yeah.
And believe me, that day, it just changed the whole thing altogether.
Right.
That is leadership. I think
Yes.
that master, I'm still in touch with him.
Yes.
That is leadership. I mean, amazing. That
So
is.
true.
Yeah.
So true. We all have these memories of those moments
Yes.
where it changed a particular fundamental
Correct.
confidence inside
Yes.
ourselves. That's so true.
It's like untying that knot,
Yeah.
and everything opens up in front of you, and you're so at ease.
Absolutely.
So that is something I try and I that's what I tell these guys, that I'm there. Don't worry, I'll take the blame, but
Right.
you do it. Yeah, you know what to do.
Right.
As long as you're doing the right thing, I don't need to step in.
Interfere.
Yeah.
And this comes from a lot of inherent confidence that even if they make a mistake, I will still have time to correct that mistake.
Correct.
Because ultimately you are not relinquishing your responsibility.
No.
It's but you are able to freely allow them to make a little bit of mistake before it becomes a big disaster.
Correct.
So because then you can step in and then take
Right.
control again.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah, so that is it about navigation. So otherwise, you've been on tankers. I think it's the same.
Yeah, I mean, what I have always felt
Yeah.
is what you mentioned also about the cargo operations part of it. That in navigation also the same concept applies. That if you understand your basics really well, then you can handle situations which otherwise people will get tensed about, or people will get they'll not know what to do. Like one incident I remember, we were coming out of Thailand, and this was a 20-year-old ship. We were about to hand it over to another management, and as soon as we came out of Thailand, I think it was Thailand, but yeah, we were transiting the East China Sea, the South China Sea, and the gyro had failed. And in South China Sea, there are areas where it's studded with fishing boats. Now, with no gyro, we have no radar, because radar is dependent on gyro to a large extent. We have no EGDIS giving us proper directions. Everything was manually set. So we are setting it based on the magnetic compass, calculating the deviations. Now, we have to trust our own deviations. We have to make sure our deviation calculations were perfect, because now we need it. This is a situation where you actually need your deviations to be correct, and everything is working on that. And only by your visual navigation and by your idea of bearings, coming back to the fundamentals of how to judge whether a vessel or a fishing boat is in collision course, depending on your bearing and the change of bearing and range, not having any other the basics. So this is what I also feel, that if we learn the basics, and we eventually entered Singapore Straits, and there were vessels calling us, and our gyro, by the way, was spinning like a wheel. Continuously it was spinning, and we had switched it off after some time. But then there were ships calling us, telling us that, why is your ship going like this in the Singapore Strait? Because this was what every other ship was getting from our AIS feed.
The
AIS feed was telling them that my ship is going in circles and going in a straight line somehow. So, and it was very, very different experience, because we have never failure of gyro.
It must be scary.
It was scary. But after a while, we pacified. Even the pilot, we informed the Singapore Port Control, the pilot, very clearly, our gyro is not working. There was no way we could ever not declare that. We had to declare it. But we took it to the pilot station through all the traffic, and through that is, in my experience, that was one of the purest form of navigation we have ever done, because it came down to the basics of magnetic compasses and deviations, and what would happen if something like that happens to you? And unfortunately, it can happen to any of us. I mean,
Yeah.
right now, many ships are equipped with 2 gyros, but some ships only have 1 gyro and 1 magnetic compass. So even if you have 2 gyros, there might be other failures which you have to. So that's something that I remember.
There's another incident I remember. Of course, nothing to do with navigation as such.
Yeah.
But going back to it because of a human factor again.
Right.
And it's so applicable in this day and age because things have become so fast. Shipping itself has become so fast, and the stress that the human body takes, the mind takes, is often overlooked. And there is no way out of it. It's a trap that you're in, and so we were calling this port in China in the Yangtze River called Belun, and we were first anchored at CJK outside.
Okay.
And there was this typhoon coming just above us, turning around and hitting South Korea. So there is no way we could have stayed at anchor, so we heaved up anchor,
Yeah.
and we rode
So
out
this is
the
on
storm.
the eastern side of China.
Correct.
The eastern coast.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we rode out the storm,
Right.
and the following day came back, picked up pilot. Pilot was delayed because of the storm, so the logistical planning was all haywire. So we picked up pilot, and we arrived port, finished discharging, and because of this entire episode, missing our turn to pick up pilot because of the storm, lot of ships around and drifting over there, no sleep, people were not well rested, I was not rested, nobody was rested. Getting into port, we had a PSC inspector coming on board. So it went on, and China, we just had about 60-70,000 tons, so they took us out in just about 20 hours.
Right.
So all put together, we were all tired. And so we were sailing out at around midnight. I got on the bridge. Third officer is there. I asked him, have you done your control test? Yes. Is everything ready? Yes. Pilot comes on board. We pick up the gangway. Station's called. Everybody's there. Made fast tug. Pilot says, okay, can we single up? We can. So we start singling up. We singled up to one breastline, two breastlines, forward and aft.
Right.
One and one. And then he says, okay, Captain, dead slow ahead. That's when I realized we had not tried out engines.
Okay.
And not tried out engines, the indicator cocks were open.
Okay. Oh.
And I have this practice of telling the chief engineer to keep a walkie-talkie in the engine room so that he's listening to our communication.
Our communication.
And I'm telling the third officer from the bridge wing, okay, dead slow ahead. And from the engine room, chief engineer saying, Captain, we've not tried out engines, the engine indicator cocks are open. And this is like the ship is slowly moving, start moving, strong currents.
Right.
And
you still have your breast lines on.
Breast lines on, breast lines are getting tight.
Right.
Oh no, sorry, the forward breast lines cast off.
Cast off.
So you have the aft breast line.
is-
So I'm trying to use the breast line to hold the ship. Not happening. Getting tight. Okay, slack a little bit. We've got this huge bulk carrier just behind us.
Oh, God.
And I'm telling this pilot is like jumping. He's like, oh my God. He was like, oh.
Yeah.
I'm telling him, pilot, you tell the tug to pull. You tell the aft tug to pull. Oh, pulling, where is this? And you won't believe it. I think 5 meters or something. We just clear the bow. Oh,
My God.
that was.
So he could give you the engines by that time.
No, he couldn't.
But the
tug pulled.
Oh, okay.
And it was just enough for us to. So I mean, like,
My
we were
God.
sitting down and talking about it. These are all challenges, yeah.
Very much,
yeah,
very
and
much. This is such a real experience.
yeah,
like,
and the
your-
tragic part is, I can share it with you, and you would understand. But this anybody not from a shipping background will not understand it.
Understand what this is.
Yeah, it's like
I really feel that emotion when you're passing like 5 meters from a ship.
yeah.
Whoa,
So that was one incident.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that always has surprised me, and sort of it's also a part which makes me feel proud of this profession, is that we have no margin of error.
Yeah.
It's really that small a margin of error. I mean, people might think that, okay, it's a white collar job, standing on the bridge, looking at nothing for the whole day, some drinking coffee sometimes, but the stakes are so high. It's unbelievable. I mean, and this, when it comes. And when you come face to face with that danger, with that real possibility of touching another ship, it makes it all the more real. It makes it all the more.
Another thing that made me understand, and in fact, not just me, the entire team, that anything that goes wrong on board a ship, there's always a history behind it. I mean, it's a chain reaction. Like this incident, I would rather go back to that hurricane which passed over us, and we had to heave up anchor and drift all night. Nobody had slept, nobody had taken enough rest. So it started from there actually.
Yeah,
and the last bit was this. So it's always a
very nice an analogy, and how something so small can land up in something so big.
Yeah,
that's really yeah. Awesome. So it was fantastic having you with us today, and I mean, I'm really honored, and it's a pleasure to have you on in the office today, and great. I mean, I believe all of us have learned quite a bit more about how the operations go, navigation, and various other things that we discussed. Any parting thoughts or any concluding thoughts for our viewers and for anybody you feel that would benefit, like a sailor who's probably about to sail on a bulk carrier?
I wouldn't stick to bulk carrier. I would say anybody wants to go out to sea, just enjoy it. As simple as that. I know you're going to be away from home. I know you're going to be away from family, friends, but at the end of the day, if you enjoy what you're doing, I think it's applicable in any field. But shipping makes a little different because there is no place to run away to. You don't want to work today. You go out and you just find water all around. You can't go back home. You can't say that I'm not going to. So you still have to stay there. And always, I would say to youngsters mainly that don't make money the motivating factor. It is never the motivating factor. What can you buy with 100 rupees that you cannot buy with 90 rupees? So money is never the motivating factor. Don't make it that. If you don't make it that, you have to be peaceful. Because if that becomes the main thing in life, then I don't think you're going to enjoy
that experience.
Yeah.
So true. Yeah. Couldn't agree with you more. I mean, absolutely. So true. Thanks a lot, Captain Anand. Very nice to have you. Thank you so much.